Hi everyone, and welcome to our next edition of Meet the Creator, YA edition, and we are recording this in July. So I do hope you're all off on holiday and having a great time and watching this on the recording, because we get little enough holiday as it is. So it is my great delight today to be interviewing Jonah Dim about her absolutely amazing YA novel, which I have very much enjoyed reading, which is called My Teeth in Your Heart. So very much welcome, Jo. Lovely to have you here.
It's lovely to be here.
So are you happy to give us a bit of a reading first, please, Jo? That would be lovely.
I will. I'm going to read the very opening. I'll explain there's two timelines in this novel. There's the timeline in sort of 1974, where Anna, who's the daughter of expats, lives in Varosha in Cyprus, and she meets a boy in a bookshop. And then there's the timeline in 2024 when her granddaughter Billy goes back to Cyprus to try to find her real grandfather. But this opening is just after that first timeline, so February 1975, when Anna has been evacuated from Cyprus because of the Turkish invasion. She's back living in England, and she's found out that she's pregnant. So Anna, February 1975. Anna groaned, her forehead dappled with sweat, as she knelt on the cold stone floor of her grandparents' lavatory for the fourth time in as many hours. Why did they call it morning sickness when it lasted well past lunch, and for months on end, not the few weeks she'd imagined? So familiar was she with the pristine porcelain bowl of the toilet that she'd begun to think of this Armitage Shanks chap as a character. His pitying face, his sighs, his dry hand as he patted her on the head and said, "There, there," as another plume of orange vomit splashed against the white china. Well, it would be nice if someone did, and that someone was certainly not going to be her mother, whose words on the subject were unrepeatable and whose subsequent slap spoke volumes. It wasn't as if she'd picked this state to be flippant, or as some sort of slight to her parents or to A-levels. She wanted to sit her exams, for heaven's sake, wanted to get to Cambridge. No chance of that now. She tried to get rid of it, had lifted heavy things, drunk the gin she'd found at the back of her grandfather's liquor cabinet. But all that had succeeded in doing was adding to the queasiness and tally of lavatory visits. Nancy had once said something about a knitting needle, but Nancy was probably back in Dagenham now, and Anna wasn't sure what she was supposed to do with the thing, even if she could have found one. Her grandmother's crafting was limited to calligraphy, and none of the equipment for that seemed usefully medical. "Anna!" Her mother's sharp tone snagged on the landing banister, scuttled across cabbage rose carpet before slipping under the lavatory door. "Anna!" "I'm fine," she managed. Not that her mother would be concerned. Just desserts, she'd made perfectly clear. There was a silence then. "There's somebody here to see you." Anna groaned again, this time inwardly. It was probably her father over from Bedford, just as he'd threatened. Now she'd be for it. Her mother's disgust was one thing, but he would have plans and punishment. She flushed the lavatory and managed to stand, pulling her sweater over her distended belly. No hiding her little secret now. 6 months gone she was, possibly more. Her head was full suddenly of last summer, of Cyprus, so far from this wet February in Cheltenham. God, what she would give to go back to the simmering heat of Varosha, back to that bookshop on Euripides Street, back to him. And would she change things if she could? Would she?
What a delight. It is always wonderful. As librarians, we absolutely love nothing more than having an author read part of their book to us. So thank you very much for that. It's a real treat. I loved the dual narratives. I really enjoyed that. Apart from, Jo, you are very good at getting to a really interesting bit and then it switches to the other one. So you certainly kept me reading. I've got to say, you
very deliberately.
So with Anna's story being set during the Turkish invasion of Cyprus, I'm guessing there was a lot of research you had to do. What did that entail?
So there was a huge amount of research to do. Up until just a couple of months before I started this novel, I'd never even heard of Varosha. I knew very little about
Mm.
Cyprus. Varosha was all it was the name of one of my best friends.
Yeah.
And I'd assumed she was called Varosha. It just sounded like an exotic name. I thought her parents were hippies or something. And then she'd explained that she was called Varosha because she'd been evacuated as a baby from this place in Cyprus. She was conceived in Varosha
Yeah.
and was born just before the Turkish invasion and had to be evacuated out because her parents were living and working out there. And then I got this phone call a few months later from the publisher, UCLan, wonderful Hazel, who'd said, would you be interested in writing a novel about the Turkish invasion of Cyprus in 1974, in specifically a place called Varosha? And I was on my way literally at that moment to meet Varosha. And so obviously I said yes. It was the story, basically, Hazel's father had also been evacuated, but as a teenager. And so the book was actually commissioned, but with no more detail than they wanted a YA romance set in Cyprus in 1974. But luckily, because of my friend Varosha, her parents had kept everything from that time, all like newspaper headlines, they'd kept diaries, they'd kept like pamphlets, restaurant menus, this huge suitcase of treasure. Basically, it was incredible. So I was able to do a lot of research with all of their stuff. I did also have to read a huge amount of history of the backstory, because it wasn't, that invasion obviously didn't come from nowhere. There were centuries of conflict and different occupations at different times in history, including the British. Obviously, we occupy a lot of places. It doesn't tend to go well. So there was a lot of reading. I read there aren't many books set there. I read a couple of books set out in Cyprus, Victoria Hislop's. I think it's called The Sunset or The Sunrise. I can't remember now, which is terrible. I read that. There is also Ellie Shafak's The Island of Missing Trees, which I did not read because it's too close. I didn't want to. I don't tend to do it when I'm writing something. I try not to read anything that's too close because I don't want to either consciously or unconsciously steal from someone. I've only read the opening of it. I've stayed away from it because of, writing something so it's set in the same place and about similar events. It was a huge amount of research for me, but I'm an academic. Research is my other thing. I was at school, I was a nerd and a swot. I lived in libraries. It's a great chance to go back and just spend a lot of time in the library again.
Well, that's never a bad thing, as
No,
we know.
exactly.
I saw the photos of Russia on your Instagram. So, did you go there yourself? And what was the experience of going there like
It
for you?
was, yeah, so I did. I'm going to reach, actually, do you know what? They're right here. So I'm going to hold up a couple while I chat to you so that you can see. So it used to be this amazing resort, which Elizabeth Taylor used to holiday there. It was beautiful. And now it's just absolutely derelict because it's contained by barbed wire on both sides. It's a whole city within a sort of weird buffer zone patrolled by the UN. And there's the old Barclays Bank, which is just left to rack and ruin now. So yeah, I got to go out there. We stayed in Larnaca. I went with my friend Varosha, who'd not been back to the actual place. It's very hard to get to because North and South Cyprus are completely divided by a military patrolled border. No buses will cross it. So we had to hire a car, and you get to the border crossing and you have to have all sorts of papers, passports. Your insurance stops at the crossing, so you have to pay the border guards for insurance to carry on driving. It's all very nerve-wracking getting across. And then you drive into Famagusta, which is the Turkish bit of the city. Varosha actually just means suburb, so Varosha was just the suburb of Famagusta. And you go through a sort of gate, patrolled gate, And it's like you walk into this incredible ghost town. It's everything is still there, but it's just been left to dereliction. And there are soldiers on every corner. It's a lot of roads are roped off completely, so you can't go down them, but you can walk around for hours and you can get onto the beach. Bizarrely, there's a cafe on the beach, so you can sit on the beach with barbed wire around you and soldiers with guns in buildings, like snipers in buildings, and you can sit on the beach eating your cornetto. It's very strange, eerie, weirdly beautiful, but very upsetting, especially for my friend Verosha, who was with me. It was incredibly moving for her, but it was absolutely essential for the book that I went there, because there was some one to be able to just like set the scene a bit more, because there are photos on the internet, but it's not on Google Maps because it's a UN patrolled military zone, so you can't, like most of the earth, you can Google Earth it and go and look around it, even if you can't get there. You absolutely can't with Varosha. So you have to rely on the few photos that there are. But being there is a different matter. And I found out that there were certain streets that I couldn't get down. I changed a scene in the 2024 timeline when Billy, the granddaughter, goes back and she goes into Varosha, and they have to sneak past guards and get down the street and then get stopped. So yeah, it was an incredible and important experience going there.
It sounds absolutely surreal, to think of the sheer abandonment of, a whole town is
It's
just,
bizarre. It's such a waste, because neither, it's like, well, it's dog in a manger time. You've got this, you've taken this city, but you're not going to actually live in it, but you're not going to let the Greek Cypriots have it back either. It's very, very odd and quite anger making as well.
yeah, I can imagine. Okay, to move on to something else, which is that struck me. So I think the sex scenes in My Teeth in Your Heart are incredibly well done.
Thank you very much.
Must compliment you on those. And I very much appreciated the fact that those scenes that are between two loving partners are given a lot more detail than the one extremely shocking, very violent scene. Was that a conscious decision you made? Because the contrast is quite stark between.
I'm glad, and it was a conscious decision, but I did actually have to fight to keep the detail in the consensual scene. I'm very glad my editor conceded in the end and agreed. I feel very strongly that there should be more positive sex in YA novels, because certainly when I was that's where we got our idea of what sex was when I was a teenager, and now it's all too easy to get it from the internet, and that is not a good place to be learning about sex. So I felt very strongly there should be positive sex in there, but at the same time, I didn't want to linger on the assault scene. No one wants to spend time in that. I don't like to see it portrayed in detail on film or television. I don't want to read about it in detail. It happens and then we move on. It's gratuitous to have any more than that. And also, she sort of detaches from herself when it's happening. So it would be, it reflects that lack of detail, because she's just gone somewhere else in her head necessarily to sort of self-preserve at that point in time.
Very much so, and I do agree that I think it's very important that we don't protect kids from the reality of sex and things that happen, because they need to read about positive experiences.
I absolutely agree. I think the joy of books is that they are safe. They are safe spaces to learn about these things, but I am also aware that reading certain things can be triggering, and so it's important for readers to understand that what's in there, but not to say, oh, you shouldn't read it because of this, but just to let you know that there's some difficult things in here. I don't want to shy away from portraying them, but at the same time I want them done in a sensitive way. Marcus Sedgwick, the lovely late great Marcus Sedgwick, used to say, there is nothing you can't write about for teenagers, it's how you do it.
Mm.
And I absolutely agree.
I couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. I mean, because there is this thing now. I'm going to go on to talk a little bit about book talk, but I mean, in book talk, they talk about it being closed door themes, which for my generation is the equivalent of Mills and Boons going dot 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 and then carrying on. And obviously, I can see that for some people that would be good, but I also think it's incredibly important for teenage to see, as you quite rightly said, positive sexual scenes, and not just quite rightly things like porn on the internet, which we all know is far too prevalent, far too prevalent. So I know something else that I learned from your Instagram. So talking about the writing blocks, and you have interesting thoughts on those things, which I was quite interested to hear about. So can you elaborate a little bit on that for us?
Yeah, so I think I come from quite a different perspective to most people because I've always written. My job has always been writing,
Yeah.
even though I've not thought of myself as a writer till I started writing fiction. I was a TV writer, a radio writer, and then I went into politics. And my job was title was campaigns writer, and I wrote speeches, lines to take. So I've always written, and there is no writer's block when you're a journalist or a speechwriter. You don't have that. It feels like a luxury to have writer's block,
Yeah.
because you've just got to get, especially in news where you're writing every half an hour, you're rewriting stuff. So I very much come from that background, and what that background has given me is a really strong planning method. So you don't just write out of the blue, you plan it out, you've got points, and then you write from that. So you're not writing into a void, you're looking down at your notes going, oh yeah, then now I do this, and oh, and now I'm going to write about that. It follows a format. And the more I've written fiction, the more and more I've taught structure and how things work, the more I've realized that when people say to me they've got writer's block, they actually mean one of two things. One, they're having a really bad mental health day, and it's just writing is just too hard, and that is totally understandable. The other thing that people have that they tend to call writer's block is that they don't know where the story's going, and that's because they've not planned it out properly. And that's, again, a very different thing. And so when I write, I separate the book out into two chunks. I have planning and I have writing. And the planning bit, I spend months wandering around, having ideas and jotting them down in notebooks in no particular order. I spend hours with my characters. And then I've got all these stack of notebooks, and out of them, I can find a plot, because I'll have all the plot points will be in there somewhere. And so I write out plot point by plot point. I'll type up the notebooks, I'll chop them up and move everything around till it's in the right order. And then I've got this incredibly messy Blue Peter style first draft.
Yeah.
And then I come to the writing bit. Now, none of that previously has been writing. It's been typing up notes, or it's been writing notes.
Yeah.
There's no wasted time. There's no like writing 3,000 words and going, oh, that was wrong, I'll start again. It doesn't, it's just I've crossed out a couple of notes. And then when I come to the writing bit, I know exactly what's going to happen chapter by chapter. So all I have to think about is the words, the sentence level. At no point am I stuck thinking, I don't know what happens now. And I've no point have I gone down a dead end. I will have gone down loads of dead ends in the planning stage and thought, oh no, that was a really daft idea. That can't happen. But because I've only been thinking about it in my head, I've not lost hours or even days of time and thousands of words. So yeah, to me, I think writer's block, it just conjures up this idea that writers are somehow above other humans, or that, which I find insulting to everyone else, or that writing is this sort of channeling of spirits. It's magical somehow. And it isn't. It's just really hard work. And yes, you have to have an aptitude for it, but mostly it's just graft. And I think imbuing it with this sort of mystical idea of the muse does nobody any favours at all.
Well, I find that very refreshing. because as you said in your Instagram, it's a job.
Yeah.
And we can't deal with I can't do my job today because I haven't got the ideas. It's just got to be done, hasn't it?
I
So
think it's also really helpful when you're teaching it, and for children when I go into schools, it is a job. It is something you can learn to do. We can all write something. It'll come out differently, but it's not that you're either a writer or you're not, because you haven't got
yeah,
this mystical special superpower skill thing. It's just either you've got an aptitude for it, and it's like playing the violin. Some people might have an aptitude for it, and they will practice and practice and they'll become an incredible musician. Others might just pass their grade 4 and 5, but they've worked hard at it.
mm,
It's not a magical thing that you get that's sort of a birthright, or it just doesn't work like that. It's something that you work really hard off. This was something I learned when I worked with Chris Hoy, who is an amazing, inspiring cyclist as well as writer. And he's so clear about that. He said, if I did not work every day at what I do, I'd just be a fellow with a fancy bike. And that's the
yeah.
same with writing. If I didn't work every day, I'd just be a woman with some very nice pens and notebooks. That's, you know, I, it's muscle memory. You have to keep at it
Yeah.
to get it right.
Well, that was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us about the book. I would
Thank
thoroughly
you.
recommend it for older YA. I have to say, I would go older YA, but really enjoyed it. And obviously, your writing just goes from strength to strength. So we'll be watching what comes out
Thank
next.
you.
Thank you
Thank
very
you so
much.